From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And coming up today, K-State's Dan O'Brien will look at the grain market's reaction to the USDA's monthly Grain Supply and Demand Report released yesterday. Also today, K-State's Chip Redmond will join us. He'll highlight several of the highly useful tools for you agricultural producers at the Kansas Mesonet website, managed by the Weather Data Library here at K-State. Among those, the new Livestock Comfort Index, as well as the local temperature inversion data, the latter providing good guidance when making pesticide application decisions. And of course, later on, K-State's Mary Knapp will be aboard for her weekly segment on Kansas agricultural weather. All that and more right here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today as we take up the grain markets in the company once again of Dan O'Brien, grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, along with us from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. And the USDA was gracious enough, Dan, yesterday to supply us with another round of grain supply and demand numbers, the monthly WASDE report, as it's called. Well, the market, to say it this way, took all those numbers in stride. There was minimal reaction for the most part.
Yes, when you see how the futures prices responded, really the only movement of anything more than just a few cents was with wheat, and that was to the downside, responding really more to harvest pressure than anything. So July 2020 wheat closed at $4.47, down 10.5 cents, whereas July soybeans closed up basically half a cent at $8.66. Corn closed a little bit higher at $3.29 3/4, up 3.5 cents. And it says a lot that corn number closed higher, and it got up to $3.29, almost $3.30. And for most of our experience in the last few years, we've been seeing prices $3.50, $3.60, $3.70, $4 thereabouts. So that, again, the outlook for acres and production and cautions, worries about the usage side are leading us to where we're at. D's corn at $3.43.5, soybeans about $8.76 most years. But in our experience of late, it's been $9.50, something like that. Actually, wheat isn't far off of what our previous experience has been. July at $4.47, we've certainly been higher, but we've been lower than that too. So I think I would say for this report that you look at the pre-report expectations, really no major surprises. If anything, wondering about some emerging issues on that are worth watching. Again, whereas in Kansas, we've got our crops pretty well in. Our colleagues in Illinois, Indiana, other places in the Corn Belt to the east of us, they're having prevented planting meetings. So there'll be some issues to watch, and I think that part of that, it'll potentially come into play, potential planting issues as we look at the acreage report coming in here at the end of June, and any hidden usage issues. And those hidden usage issues would have to do with feed demand primarily. They'd be revealed in that stocks report that'll come in on at the very end of June here as well. So we've got this report out of the way, and the next thing we're looking for will be the acreage numbers that farmers reveal or tell the USDA in their surveys, and also we'll be looking for some undercurrent of something we didn't anticipate on feed usage, especially for corn, as we move on to the rest of summer after we get the acreage and the stocks report done.
It's something of a sidebar now, Dan, but The USDA has, in fact, and at long last, finished up its account on 2019 row crops where fields were not harvested well into 2020, if at all. That had been a pending thing, but now the numbers are in for those few northern states that had still yet to be accounted for.
Yes, you can grind through the details, but the upshot of the whole thing for corn, which was where we were really worried, was that we reduced U.S. production from last year by about 46 million bushels. And that's important, but it's not 200, 300, 400 that we were fearful that we would get. The bright side is it's a testimony to the resilience of farmers in those northern states that come snow drifts, whatever, they were pursuing getting the old crop out. You saw pictures on the ag-oriented social media of combine going through the field and the planter not far behind. So that's where our friends in particularly North Dakota were in for some of these crops. So by the time you took that 46 million out of production from that old crop 2019-20 marketing year that landed August 31st and kind of offset that by a reduction primarily in ethanol usage, it was kind of a wash and end up with ending stocks about 2.1 for that old crop marketing year, about 2.1 billion bushels for corn, brought that into this projections now for the new crop marketing year and really ended up with things offsetting themselves and really no change in the USDA's projection of still almost 16 billion bushels of corn for this fall here in the U.S. and ending stocks over 3 billion bushels. So I think when I stand back and look at it and wonder what advice we could give to Kansas farmers, I think we just need to be aware that this scenario is in writing and it's bearish. The projected price is $3.20. You would hope that would hold there. If we get over 3 billion bushels and heavens, anything more than what they're talking about for yields, et cetera, then we're at risk this fall for price lows. And it's hard to be enthusiastic about forward pricing a lot when you're looking at relatively low prices. However, we're in June, and in some years when the crop has been put in the ground for U.S. corn, and if we have great weather forecast, no fear of La Nina, no whatever coming up. We have had years in the past where we've started to slide into harvest now in terms of new crop futures prices and pricing opportunities. With dry conditions forecast, again, in our notes that we put together, there's a more possibility of a La Nina event this summer, although if you read the National Weather Service info, it's talked about in couched terms, but still, there's more risk than there has been in the last several years of that. So, until that gets resolved, you would wonder just how willing the markets are to start to just discount any weather risk. So, again, 3 billion bushel plus, ending stocks projected 22-23% stocks to use. At the midst of it, for anybody that anticipates that they'll have to sell corn at harvest, you probably need to wonder about what that downside could be. And, if it's a really big crop, would $3 hold?
Back to the report and what it said about world soybean stocks. Yeah. If there was something encouraging within that report from the price side of it, that might have been it. Those were lower than anticipated. So how much should be drawn from that little bit of information, though, Dan?
Well, probably just a moderate amount. In the soybean market here yesterday morning, there was a report that China had come into the market. After stating about a week ago they weren't coming in ever, came back in and bought some old crop and then a whole bunch, a new crop, sizable quantities. And these numbers do not reflect that. So what they do reflect is that the last 3 marketing years, world soybean stocks dropped from 38% stocks to use 18-19 marketing year to 28% a year ago. And for this year, they're projected to be down to 26. If you take China out, again, you're dropping from 38 to 30 to 27.5. So, we're generally not that worried about soybean supplies around the world, but these numbers are dropping, and it offers, in the short run, some support for the market. The other news in the soybean market that I would wonder on is reports that we've had aggressive selling by Brazilian farmers. 87%, I think, of their crops already sold, from what I'm told. And again, aggressive Chinese buying. The good side of that is that, great, they're selling like gangbusters, get it all out of the way. But once Brazil is done, then where do they go? Maybe Argentina. Argentina's having issues, financial issues with some of their key soybean processors. So that's another thing to me that I think we should be aware of. That yes, right now Brazil's at the front of the line, but they're selling at such a gangbusters pace that there won't be much after a certain part. And then if there's any risk in the world, if demand stays strong, we'd be in better position to, again, in a month, in 2 months, to have a U.S. soybean export business out of necessity because there's nowhere else to go, start to pick up and we see some price support from it.
And final item here, we are on the verge of wheat harvesting here in Kansas. Combines are rolling just on the other side of the border and perhaps have eased their way over into Kansas in the last day or two. What should producers be thinking about as far as marketing new crop? Always this store versus sell question. And given the tenor of things right now, where does one lean in that sense?
Well, what I notice is when you look at basis levels in central Kansas versus western Kansas, for wheat basis based on yesterday's USDA Ag Marketing Service reports, basis levels in Dodge City, Colby, Garden City, all 40, 50 cents. Best basis bids actually 35 under out there in Syracuse, Ulysses. And you compare that to basis bids in the eastern part of the state, 10, 20 under, 5 under. So the generally export-oriented part of the state, a little higher basis bids out there farther to the west, not so good. I wonder, given the dry conditions that they had, what their protein levels will be. And if that will come into play, and particularly when I see some of those areas out to the west having a little bit better basis in the southwest, but it's at the very, very front end of harvest, and will that show up yet is probably the question.
Right. Dan, have a good weekend. Thanks for being along with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Eric.
Dan O'Brien, grain market economist with K-State Research and Extension, and we'll be back on Agriculture Today.
For information on threatening weather, you should depend on the National Weather Service and their broadcast on NOAA Weather Radio. NOAA Weather Radio is an all-hazards radio network that provides up-to-the-minute weather information, including life-saving warnings anytime, day or night. NOAA Weather Radio also broadcasts information on man-made disasters, such as chemical spills, amber alerts, or other national emergencies. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Agriculture Today continues now. Each Friday on the broadcast, as you know, we talk Kansas agricultural weather with K-State's Mary Knapp, and we will do so again today. But that'll be later on. For right now, we're visiting with the individual here at the university who manages the Mesonet site out of K-State, a very important weather and climate resource for you producers. He is an assistant meteorologist in the Department of Agronomy at K-State. Again, talking with Chip Redmond. And Chip, what we wanted to do as we bring you in today is talk about the numerous features on that Mesonet website that producers could find very much useful to them. You and your team work relentlessly to add new features to that website.
Yeah, it's an ongoing project that I don't think it ever will end, but it's great. We keep getting new products, new ideas, new concepts that people want to work with. One of the popular things this time of year, it's heat, hot.
Right.
And for early June, we've been pretty warmer than normal, and so we start to get worried about cattle and animals that are outdoors. So one of our newer products last year that we deployed is the Animal Comfort Index. So it takes into consideration the animals and then the wind and solar radiation and humidity and temperature, and all those combined to kind of give an idea of what temperature and stress level especially cattle could be feeling as a result of that heat.
And you are basing this on readings from obviously a number of sites in Kansas. Roughly, how many in all would be included there?
Yeah, we've got about 70 weather stations now, including the temporary stations we've set up at some technology farms across the state, both in western and central Kansas. So we try to cover the whole state pretty respectively with the spatial configuration, but we continue to add stations. We were just working today in Jefferson County, putting one up in Oskaloosa, and we've got quite a few that are going to pop up here in western Kansas over the next few months.
And this will be evident as we talk, but one of the main attributes of all of the data is that it is updated routinely. It's essentially real time, isn't it, or fairly close to it?
Yeah, it's got about a 10-minute delay just because it takes time to download the data and run it through quality control, then upload it to the server, and then have you hit refresh or hit the web page. But you can look at the main page, and it's got data there that updates about every 5 minutes or so. And you can look at, the current temperatures, current wind speed, and current precipitation, or at least last 24-hour precipitation up to current in nearly real time.
And for that livestock producer specifically, when they go to this page, at each of those sites, you'll have a basic rating of just what stress level might be existing in that location. So it goes from mild to moderate to severe. It's very definitive, isn't it?
Yeah, it even goes all the way up to extreme, and those are classifications that are set by University of Nebraska. It's a recognized equation and used by a lot of people across the United States.
So this has been launched last year in full effect. We'd encourage cattle and other livestock producers to view that and see if they can't make use of it as we return to the heat here very soon around the state. It's the Animal Comfort Index on the Mesonet site. But you do have, as has been the case for some time now, valuable tools for our crop producers as they manage through the growing season. One of those things that we've cited multiple times with you and Mary would be the degree days chart that keeps a running account of that facet of crop development.
Yeah, you can get in there and put your plant date and put it to current and look at kind of what stage are your crops, especially corn and sorghum. We do not have it for soybean, unfortunately. You can also look at it compared to normal. So it'll show you if you're ahead or below normal values or average values for the time of the year in the location. And you can click that for your location, for your nearest station, or you can get a bunch of stations within a perimeter around you and kind of take the average of that and look at that graphically as well as numerically.
And degree days, by their very nature, are cumulative, so you have that running number that can clue one in as to just how conditions are progressing for their crops then.
Right. And so it uses air temperature. I know there's other ones out there that use other things, but we use air temperature.
If you'd like to know where the degree days are for your location, you can simply seek that link on the website as well. Here's something we may not have talked about before. Want folks to be aware of it. You have a continual data set on inversion. Explain what that refers to, Chip, if you would.
Yeah, so this is a popular time to spray. You folks start looking at spraying soybeans and whatnot this time of year. So dicamba is one of those things that you need to be concerned about when you spray that, and it's very, very potent and very sensitive to inversions in the atmosphere. So basically an inversion is when the air temperature at the surface is cooler than the air above it. And so what that does is it basically stratifies the atmosphere and prevents vertical motion or vertical movement of particles. Instead, they want to move horizontally. And so when you get that lack of mixing or vertical motion, it traps all that herbicide or pesticide at the surface and won't allow it to disperse. And that can become as it volatilizes, it can become very potent and it can move horizontally along the ground, usually downhill, and we'll see lots of off-target potential drift impacts as a result.
So then this tool takes all of the elements that factor into inversion, it tracks those and posts those on the site at each of the locations for producers to have an idea of the potential of that inversion?
So what it does is it measures the temperature at 6 foot and 30 foot right now, and it basically takes that difference and calculates if there's an inversion right now or not. So you can get on there, and all our 30-foot towers have those two sensors, so you can look at if there's an inversion or not currently at that station. We measure a little higher up. It doesn't replace in-field measurements. You still have to be able to measure at your place of application, but it provides a regional view of if there's inversion in place or not, and you can kind of get an idea of the lower atmosphere stability just by taking a quick look and seeing if it's positive or negative. And positive values show up as, I believe it's orange or red, and those imply that an inversion's in place.
And, of course, another element that applies directly to drift potential would be wind. You've the speed and direction at those locations to complement the information on the temperature inversion potential there.
Yes, we still display the wind speeds along with that. You know, when people want to spray, they often look at wind speed first because it's easiest, right. But they want to spray under low wind speeds. And so you actually have a low cutoff now on the labeling on these herbicides, because below 3 or 4 mile an hour, you typically will have an inversion in place when you don't have that much wind. Occasionally you don't, but you want to hit that, 3 to 10, depending on what's on the label. That window is really critical to make sure you do it when there's not an inversion in place and while there's light enough winds. But you also have to remember, wind does mix the spray. And so the off-target potential is kind of minimized a little bit because you still get the vertical motion of the atmosphere.
This is a great guide for producers as they go about their field spraying applications here in the weeks ahead. Again, it's the inversion table. Those are some of the highlighted features that you have at mesonet.ksu.edu, Chip. There are a number of other weather features as well, are there not?
Yeah, all our data is stored. You can go online and you can download the temperatures for the last few weeks, or you can download precipitation from year to date to current. If you want to look at soil temperature still, that's a quick and easy tool to grab and look at current soil temperatures and look at the trend over the last 7 days, as well as download historical data from maybe earlier in the year if you had maybe emergence issues or frost problems.
And Chip, before we let you go, might point out that navigating this site is pretty easy. Folks do need to know, though, that once they call up the initial page, they need to take an extra step to open up the world of information you have there, to put it that way.
All these products we've talked about on the website are all accessible through the menu. The menu's in the top left is 3 stacked bars. Okay. There, and you click that menu, and it'll give you an option for agriculture, for products that we've talked about today, or weather, if you want to look at historical data, or look at like maximum, minimum temperatures, that type of thing. But that menu in the top left is where you find it on our main website.
Chip, keep up the good work. Thanks for your time.
Yes, thank you, Eric.
He's Chip Redmond. Chip is the assistant meteorologist in K-State's Department of Agronomy, and he is the manager of the Mesonet website out of K-State. Producers, if you haven't had a look at that yet, it's high time you did. mesonet.ksu.edu. And we'll be back after this break. You're listening to Agriculture Today. For 25 years, K-State Research and Extension's Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services has been providing a no-cost, confidential place to call in and visit with an agricultural lawyer. Our experts are available to help you producers handle legal and financial issues. Explore your options and generate solutions. Call us at 800-321-3276 or visit us online. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network. Eric Atkinson with you, and now to today's agricultural news headlines. courtesy in part of DTN. Well, just when you thought the dicamba herbicide hubbub was settled, an emergency motion was filed late last night asking that federal court to halt all dicamba use and to hold the EPA in contempt of court for its decision to allow producers to use existing stocks of 3 dicamba herbicides. If the judges agree, the motion could once again leave producers without many herbicide options to use over millions of acres of dicamba-tolerant soybean and cotton this summer. The motion was filed by the plaintiffs who brought the lawsuit against the EPA to the U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, demanding the court end 3 herbicide registrations, Extendamax, Ingenia, and Fexapan. They did succeed when last week 3 judges ruled in their favor, effectively ending the registrations of the herbicides with a vacatur order. 5 days later, the EPA issued the cancellation order, which ended the registrations, but permitted growers and commercial applicators to continue using existing stocks of the herbicides through July the 31st. The plaintiffs include the Center for Food Safety and the Center for Biological Diversity. The EPA has responded to the motion this morning, saying that it stands by its order and will vigorously defend against attempts to limit the agency's authority to provide clarity and certainty to farmers, in the EPA's words. Dicamba registrant Bayer, which is listed as a defendant in the original lawsuit, also vowed to fight that emergency motion in court. Stay tuned. The nation's red meat and poultry producers will see a major recovery in production and prices next year, according to the latest USDA numbers. Here's more from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
U.S. red meat and poultry production's already starting to recover from the problems associated with COVID-19, and a new USDA forecast says that recovery will take 2021's output above pre-COVID levels, above 2019. Beef production this year likely will be around 25.7 billion pounds, about 5% less than 2019, but next year's beef output forecast at 27.4 billion pounds, 6% above this year and about 1% above 2019. Pork, same basic story, except pork output this year will only be less than 1% below last year, and 2021 will see production top 2019 by 2% at 28.2 billion pounds. Broilers a different story. That production expected to drop this year by a tiny amount, from 43.4 billion pounds last year to 43.3 this year, and it's forecast up next year to about 44.5 billion pounds, or almost a 3% increase. Speaking of increases, analysts say prices for steers, hogs, and broilers will likely be higher in 2021. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And the USDA today is publishing a rule in the Federal Register that will make several small corrections to the final rule published back in May for the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program. The changes include clarifying the definition of slaughter cattle and fed cattle to be animals with a weight of 1,200 pounds or more intended for slaughter, that payment calculations for livestock specifically that are based on unpriced livestock sales and specifies they apply to livestock inventory owned between April the 16th and May the 14th of this year. The changes also remove the definition of unpriced inventory and add a similar definition of unpriced to be considered consistent, that is, with the use of the term throughout that regulation. That new definition also specifies that unpriced is based on whether a forward contract, agreement, or similar binding document was in place as of January the 15th. Those changes would also make dairy operations that dissolved on or after March the 31st to be eligible for payments, the USDA noting that the dairy change would not increase the CFAP costs. There were also changes made for specialty crops. Well, amid the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent shelter-at-home regulations, the demand for flour for home baking soared. That created an acute shortage of flour at grocery stores. Now a new cooperative effort by Kansas Wheat and K-State seeks to fill that void for those in need. Marcia Boswell has more on this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Marcia?
Kansas State University's Department of Grain Science and Industry is partnering with Kansas wheat farmers to provide flour for those in need in the local community. 3 months after Kansas State University implemented limited operations and moved to remote instruction, the Department of Grain Science and Industry has brought the Hal Ross Flour Mill back online to manufacture the flour. The university will host a drive-through flour distribution on Thursday, June 18th from 3 to 7 p.m. at the Hal Ross Flour Mill, located at 1980 Kimball Avenue in Manhattan. There is no charge for the flour, and it's limited to one 10-pound bag per vehicle and is not for resale. As Safer at Home orders began, faculty noticed the absence of flour at local supermarkets and wondered if the university's milling facilities could be used to aid the local community. This idea received unanimous support from college and university leadership and moved into the planning stages weeks ago. Gordon Smith, department head for Grain Science and Industry, said we know people are struggling with basic food supplies, including flour. It's something K-State and the department could do. We have a mill, we have highly skilled faculty to run the mill, and continued support from the Kansas Wheat Commission and Kansas wheat farmers. It is a locally sourced, farm-to-table, philanthropic endeavor by K-State. Last week, 20,000 pounds of wheat was milled by department faculty with special help from the university president, Richard Myers. 10 hours of milling yielded 15,000 pounds of all-purpose white flour. Wheat kernels are made up of 3 parts, the endosperm, bran, and germ. Only the endosperm is used in the production of white flour. The remaining parts of the wheat berry will be used for animal feed. According to Justin Gilpin, Chief Executive Officer for Kansas Wheat, the Kansas Wheat Commission and the K-State Department of Grain Science and Industry have a long history of working together on projects for the wheat industry, combining stakeholder input with the department's flour milling expertise. Kansas wheat farmers were glad to help support this project. Wheat is a staple food for many Americans, and this project by K-State will help put it in the hands of people in need. The university plans to donate any flour not distributed on June 18th to the Flint Hills Breadbasket in Manhattan and Harvesters in Topeka. K-State is the only higher education institution in the world that offers bachelor's degrees in milling, bakery, and feed science and management, which are available through the Department of Grain Science and Industry in the College of Agriculture. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Many thanks, Marcia, for that word. You're tuned to Agriculture Today. We'll return shortly on the K-State Radio Network.
Social distancing slows the spread of coronavirus, so if you have a fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath, call your healthcare provider before going in. More info at coronavirus.gov. Let's all do our part, because we're all #AloneTogether. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Up next here on Agriculture Today, K-State climatologist Mary Knapp on Kansas agricultural weather. Mary, as we recap the past week and reminding folks that this is up to roughly midweek, as that's how the drought monitor is constituted, so it does not include those rains that took place Wednesday and beyond. That said, there were places that did receive some long-awaited moisture relief.
Right, and I should note it is actually Tuesday morning at the morning observations because the co-op observers report at 7 a.m., and that's the cutoff for our weekly summary that feeds into the U.S. Drought Monitor. For that, the only division that was above normal for the week of June 3rd to June 9th was the Northwest Division. They averaged just a tad under an inch in that division, 96 hundredths of an inch to be precise. It was well above normal, about a quarter of an inch above what they normally would see. And certainly, as you noted, welcome in that area. Unfortunately, it didn't move them a whole lot on the year-to-date. They're still 70% of normal for the year-to-date. And if we go back to last fall, September, it's also at the 70% range. So, again, something, but not by any means the end of the story out there, which is why they're still abnormally dry in that northwest corner on the latest drought monitor. The rest of the state saw less than half of what they would typically see, and some areas even less than that. The South Central really lost out on the thing. They averaged nothing for the week, 0, which, of course, is 0% of their normal. Southwest fared a little bit better. Southwest and West Central both averaged 1/10 of an inch. but that's still less than 15% of what they should get. For example, in Garden City area now, you would be expecting to get 1/10 of an inch a day, let alone for the week. As you move eastward, got a little bit more in the northeast and east central. They were close to 1/2 inch for both of those divisions, but still less than half of what they would typically see in the area. One of the dry spots was the southeast, which has been a contrast from what we've been reporting for most of the spring and summer.
And actually perhaps welcome news for folks down there.
Certainly not nearly as troublesome as in other parts of the state. Problem that we face in the southeast is a lot of the crops were planted into wet ground. The root development may not be as robust as you would like, so you don't want things to dry off too quickly, certainly not when you've got the wind and heat that we've had, which ups the evapotranspiration rates enormously.
So that accounts for the weather up to Tuesday morning, but there was rainfall over a fair share of Kansas Wednesday, which improved conditions here and there around the state, surely.
Well, it was certainly welcome in places. Some areas in western Kansas that got that moisture, again, it's just a drop in the bucket for what they need, and it was quickly lost. We'll see in the next week for the U.S. Drought Monitor, likely to see some improvement, most concentrated in the central part of the state where the rainfall was the heaviest. We had a number of areas that had 1.5 inches, 2.5, as much as 3 inches. So in the Ellsworth County, Russell County area will be where we're likely to see the most improvement in the U.S. Drought Monitor. In the western areas, we're still looking at extreme drought in southwest Kansas. That increased slightly. There was also some expansion of the moderate to severe drought. Lots of reports out there of very severe impacts from that, and we'll see what comes of that. On the temperature side last week, before we got the front coming through and the very nice cool down, there was a big taste of summer.
It was toasty.
Very toasty. Southwest had the high, 106. In fact, all of the divisions in the West broke the century mark. Even in northwest Kansas, they reached 101. North Central and the Central divisions both saw 100 degrees or better during that time period. The East didn't break the century mark as far as air temperature goes, but we didn't cool off nearly as much. Southwest had a high of 106, but they had a low of 50. We look at the Southeast, on the other hand, they had a high of 96, but their coldest temperature was 60. Again, indicative of the more humid air mass that is prevalent in the eastern parts of the state. So the heat index values were very, very high. And in fact, actually, you would have heat index values that were higher in the eastern part of the state than they were in the west.
So the rainfall and the cooler temperatures rolled through midweek this week. Now we're on a track for another warm-up, it sounds, which, to the positive, will be accommodating for the early wheat harvest activity expected in southern Kansas.
Right. We are expecting temperatures in the 90s across the state through the weekend and actually through most of next week. As far as rainfall goes, it's expected to be pretty much dry. There may be a few pop-up showers that rain in a certain area. For example, like Meade's system that bubbled up last night and dropped 1/4 of an inch. But they will be very, very isolated. When you look at the quantitative precip forecast for the week ending next Friday, it's a big fat 0 for most of the state. There is a small area along the Oklahoma-Kansas border where they may see as much as 1/10 of an inch, but again, generally dry. And as you note, that will be welcome for wheat harvest, not so welcome for those that are trying to get their corn and soybeans and sorghum productive. talking about those row crops, one of the problems that we had with that frontal system coming through is that we had very strong winds, and that created some green snap or breakover of the corn. Corn is elongating now at this point and is more vulnerable to that kind of injury. And there were widespread reports of that, again, particularly in the central part of the state.
Welcome to summer in Kansas. Mary, enjoy the weekend. Thanks for being along.
Thanks, Eric.
Climatologist with K-State Research and Extension, Mary Knapp, over from the Weather Data Library here at the university. Thanks to you likewise for joining us. Eric Atkinson bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.